You are listening to the One Day at a Time Recovery Podcast. On this podcast, my guests share their stories of alcoholism, addiction, and how they recovered so that you can too. My hope is that you find the inspiration and resources you need to let go of what's holding you back so that you can transform into the person you were always meant to be. Ready? Here we go. Hey friend, welcome to the podcast. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to grow up in the shadow of a famous father? Well, that's exactly what Adam Nimoy faced as the son of Leonard Nimoy, the actor who played Spock in the Star Trek franchise. Adam will be talking about his new book, The Most Human, Reconciling with My Father, Leonard Nimoy. In case you didn't know, we have a YouTube channel where you can watch all of these interviews, and this one will be fun because Adam looks exactly like his dad. Be sure to subscribe. I'm going to start doing giveaways of all the books that I feature and a lot more. I'm really excited to share this conversation with you. So without further delay, please enjoy this episode with Adam. Well, Adam, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, I have in my background a copy of your book. I just finished reading it last night, and I just want to say, well done. Such a good book.
Oh, thank you so much. I worked hard on it. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I could tell it was an easy read. It was, listen, you made me cry a couple times, but I'll try not to hold it against you.
I hope I made you laugh as well.
You did. But it was just really moving. I feel like that is the hallmark of a good book, is that it can evoke both tears of happiness and sadness as well. So I like to play a little game called a lightning round, just to sort of front load the episode with some resources. If you think about when you first got sober, was there a particular book that helped you early on in recovery?
Yeah, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, not really. I mean, was there a book that helped me in recovery? No, I mean, one of the men's meeting I go to, we read Living Sober. Listen, I mean, in all honesty, the literature in AA is so subpar. It's not great reading material. But the ideas are revolutionary, and I think probably the most impactful is really some of the stories in the big book, the little anecdotes of people in terms of their own experience, strength and hope, what happened to them, what made them get sober, and what their life is like now. Those are pretty inspiring, but most of the writing, it always occurred to me that there were just so many great ideas in the writing that were very unusual. I mean, the whole 12-step process. But the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is such clumsy reading. It's so clunky that sometimes it's a little hard to get inspired. And when I read through it with my sponsees, it's like, oh my God, this needs a rewrite desperately. But the ideas are revolutionary and and very inspiring, and and the other thing about the whole program and the writings was this whole concept of the God problem, which I have encountered a lot of people who have trouble with finding a higher power.
Yeah.
And there's a whole chapter, in fact, we agnostics in the big book. So, I always had a higher power. I just didn't know how I was supposed to relate to that higher power. And the writings, I think, were very helpful and for me to kind of get right with letting go and letting God and seeing my higher power in a whole different perspective.
I had some of those same struggles with the literature as well, because it's definitely written in the tone of that era. If you think back over your sobriety, is there a quote or a mantra that you live by?
There are so many quotes and mantras in AA that I have tried to live by daily, and they're all for the same thing. It's like, let go and let God. Don't just do something, sit there. Count to 10, count to 20, restrain of pen and tongue, contrary action. I mean, all of them are towards the same purpose, and that is to get me to stop reacting to people who piss me off. And to give my brain, a moment to collect itself. Because I heard a meeting not that long ago during the pandemic, I was on Zoom, and a young woman was talking about the fact that she lets herself off the hook and is only responsible for her second thought and her first action. Because her first thought when somebody pisses her off is always F you. And she said, I'm an addict in recovery, and that's the way my brain is wired. And there's nothing I can do about that. I have to accept that about myself. My first thought when somebody pisses me off is F you. That's just it. but I have to use the tools of recovery, like restrain a pen and tongue and count to 10, count to 20, all these tools, all these mantras to get her to keep her mouth shut and not react to stuff and let her mind calm down until she can get a grip on it and get to another emotionally more mature, reasonable thought,
Right.
which is not so reactive. And then from that, her first action would follow. So the mantras for me in AA have mostly been for me to try to control myself from immediately reacting to stuff because I usually get riled, particularly with my kids. They just love to press my buttons. So those are the mantras I think I mostly live by.
I love that. If you think about your self-care practice, do you have like a morning routine? Do you have like a weekly practice? How do you think about self-care?
Self-care means a lot of different things. I mean, self-care for me is I have to, in terms of my own recovery, it is a matter of going to meetings regularly. And that's 2 to 3 times a week. There's the men's meeting on Saturday, there's a mixed meeting on Wednesday, and there's Beit Teshuva, the residential addiction treatment center that I'm a board member of, that I attend Shabbat services on Friday night. That is my self-care for my recovery. But for me, at my age, there's other things I got to do to take care of myself. And a lot of it is physical activity because that also helps me with my brain and it keeps me, it gives, I love the endorphin high, so I do a lot of working out in the morning. Every morning I'm doing yoga or some sort of
Nice.
physical activity. I go to a regular yoga class on the weekends. And then I have regular meditation class on Wednesday mornings, and I try to meditate on my own for 10 minutes every day, which doesn't always happen. And then I try to find some piece of literature from the AA pantheon of publications. And so there's a lot that I do for self-care before delving into my work week. And that's just where I'm at this stage of my life. Everything is about maintenance, really, at
Yeah.
this point. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of levels, and it takes a lot of focus and consistency and discipline, and which I don't normally have, and routine.
Yeah. There's something about that routine that becomes sort of second nature, but I agree. Like I do all the same things. It's amazing how a little bit of yoga, some meditation, reading something inspirational in the morning, it just kind of sets the tone for the whole day and helps me to maintain that like emotional sobriety, which is so important.
Yeah, emotional sobriety. I lapse, but sometimes I will actually get on my knees and say the seventh step prayer. When when I'm thinking about it, and I really need to center myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, emotional sobriety is really where it's at for those of us who, I mean, I don't have a whole lot of, there's no obsession with using or drinking anymore. My relapses come with emotional relapses. And I talk about that a lot in the book.
Yeah.
These are the things that I still continue to need to work on because my brain is just wired that way.
Yeah, it's an ongoing process. If you think back, so you've been sober over 20 years now. If you think back to the beginning, is there something you wish you would have known right from the start?
Well, yeah, I mean, what I would have liked to know from the start was that I can survive without marijuana, without being numb all the time.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it served me very well in the end. I mean, the partying aspect was fine, but when I wanted to really be focused and productive, particularly in college, my later years in college is like I really wasn't enjoying it that much, and I wish I had known more about recovery back then. It wasn't as in vogue as it is now. That's the problem.
Right. Yeah.
I really see the situation with me was that when I got high when I was younger, it was a lot of fun. And then it's just fun with problems, and then it's just problems. But you go around chasing that fun for the next 30 years. And I wished I had known somebody else who was in recovery. And that's the only regret I have. And I really don't have any regrets because I just don't like to live that way.
Yeah.
I'm so lucky that I found recovery now, but I think it would have been better served if I had not been high every day beginning in college. It would have been nice to have been more centered and more spiritual without the use of drugs and alcohol.
Yeah, for sure. Listen, you and I are a lot alike in the sense that marijuana was my drug of choice. I mean, I did all the things, but I just needed to be numb all the time. It's so impressive to me that you were able to go through law school smoking weed. I don't know. It's kind of impressive to me.
Well, I mean, thank you, but there's a lot of us high functioning, drugs and drug addicts and alcohol. There's a lot of us.
Very high functioning. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about how we got here. I mean, clearly you wrote a whole book, but let's talk about your relationship with your dad, what life was like growing up with him.
Well, he was a very unusual person to grow up with.
Yes.
I go into great detail in the book about my relationship with my dad. I mean, it's just he was hard to relate to when I was younger. He was a very different type of person than me and had a very different type of upbringing as the son of Russian immigrants, Ukrainian immigrants. They considered themselves Russian, my grandparents, growing up in the Depression. And it's just that he was of such a different generation. He was much closer to their generation than he ever was to mine. And they, and they had, it was pretty traumatic lives that they led, my grandparents, to get out of Ukraine, was, uproot themselves and leave very suddenly because of the violence that was happening in their village. So my dad grew up with parents who are not terribly demonstrative, as he would say. And he grew up during the Depression when he was, had to hustle really to make money and didn't really care that much about school. His older brother was the academic. My dad was the hustler. He was on the street and working all the time, and they were very different. And they, as a result, and my dad got the acting bug when he was very young. And so he came to LA at age 18 with no money and no safety net. His parents were not going to help him because they wanted him to go to college and live their idea of the American dream. And he's just not going to do that. So, when you come to LA on your own without a lot of help and support and financial backing, you're kind of like in desperation mode. And my
Yeah.
dad was like that, and even when things started to get, and I just could not relate to him on that level. I was just not that kind of a kid. I was much more cerebral and really enjoyed popular culture in the 60s when I was coming of age. I turned 10 in 1966, and there was so much going on to consume, for a
Yeah.
young kid. The golden age of comic books and 60s TV and the Fab Four and an AM radio and buying 45 singles and there's just so much going on.
Great music.
It was just great. Yeah, I mean, all these great local LA music stations. I was not a guy who went out and hustled and to earn a living. And my dad was very focused on that and his
Yeah.
career, and those were his priorities. So it was very difficult connecting to him, even when we were together.
Mhm.
He's a very introverted person, and it was just hard to really relate to him. And then as a kid, and then when I got older and I got into weed and more rebelliousness, and he was in his alcoholism, which he himself has confessed to, that's when more of the conflict started to happen with him. I mean, there were a lot of good
Yeah.
times with my dad, and I actually had a lot of great experiences, and I'm really grateful for the life that we had together because so many things happened to us after 1966. We had so many experiences, traveling overseas to make movies and summer stock theater and Star Trek openings and the paparazzi. And there was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun, but connecting
Yeah.
with him was a challenge throughout most of my life.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I hear this a lot from people that they really don't want to sort of dwell on the challenges because they love their parents, right? I feel like the love of your dad really came through in your book in the form of just how painful it was that he was hard to connect with. Is that fair?
What I try to emphasize is the fact that I was always proud of him and being a consumer of popular culture and my father
Yeah.
being integral to that whole thing.
Yeah.
I could relate to him on that level, and I'm just proud of the work that he was doing, and I love Spock. Everybody loves Spock.
Yeah.
Loving Spock was no problem,
Yeah.
Loving Dad was more challenging, but yeah, that is a fair assessment, I think.
Yeah, my mom was a super Trekkie, and we would just watch every single episode. And I remember when I got older, and we're watching all the next generations of all the movies and things like that. It was always, and then we were super into Fringe, the Fringe series that your
Yeah,
dad was in. That
yeah.
was super cool. And I in the book you talk about things like him getting his star on the Hollywood Walk of, is it the Walk of Fame? Is that what they call it?
Yeah.
but him getting his star and just you were clearly very proud of your dad. At the same time, some of the facts were is that there was pain. And if you look back on experiencing that pain, how do you think that affected your self-esteem or your sense of who you are?
It can be challenging for people who have celebrity parents. I mean, it's a big it's a bit of a challenge, really, on a lot of levels. That kind of incredible success is sometimes overwhelming. And I had my own direction. There are a lot of ways in which I'm like my dad. I did have a lot of my own ambition. I always wanted to go to law school, always. And I was really, and I really, for the most part, although there were some tragic events that happened in those 3 years at law school. I mean, it's not all fun, but but it was a really good experience for me. It was something I was really proud that I was able to do, and it was something that my dad could never do. So I was like proving my own worth and creating my own identity.
Yeah.
This is the whole thing. It gets really weird. It's like all this adulation and the success and the paparazzi and the fans really is all about him, not about
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
I'm in a celebrity family, but I didn't do anything. Rod Roddenberry says this all the time. Gene Roddenberry's son, he created Star Trek, and Rod is like the inheritor of that, of all that, but sometimes he has a real sense of humility and has to really remember who Rod is and what his dad created, and there is a difference, and we have to kind of work on our own. What is ours, and what do we want to do and accomplish? And I always had those ambitions, so I was very lucky. I think that I had sort of the drive and the objectives that my dad did. I mean, they changed over time after practicing law for 7 years. It was like I got to get the hell out of here. I do not want to be doing this anymore.
Yeah.
Then I just wanted to follow in the footsteps of my old man and start, thinking about directing.
Right.
It is a little bit challenging, but I don't think it's that much different than what anybody else goes through with a successful parent in a profession, of their own. I think it's always challenging to try to create your own identity. And my kid,
Yeah.
I'm just very supportive of my kids and the way that they're creating their own identities. So um, it's definitely challenging. And sometimes the problem with my dad was that sometimes I felt that I was not really living up to his expectations.
That's rough.
Yeah, which could be
Yeah.
can be a little bit difficult. But then, in time with therapy, with recovery, I got to understand that. And my mother once said this: as hard as my dad is on me, he's hardest on himself.
Yeah.
And I
That's
really
always the
got to
case.
see, yeah, I just really got to understand that my dad had his own insecurities, which was
Mhm.
really interesting, and his own, unmet desires and objectives and goals that were not completely achieved. He had his own.
Yeah, definitely. Let's walk through sort of the timeline of, I know you started smoking weed when you were young and throughout college. When did you decide that it was a problem for you?
Well, first of all, I was late to the weed game. I didn't start smoking regularly until I was 17. And I started
Okay.
smoking, I was smoking with a lot of people in school who had started when they were 13 or 14.
Right, yeah.
So I was a little late to the game.
Not
Uh,
much late.
yeah, I mean, when it started to become a problem was when my kids were old enough to kind of realize that I was like acting weirdly different.
Yeah.
And I just found that unacceptable. I was sick and tired of being sick and tired at that point anyway. I just didn't want to be high anymore, and I just couldn't stop myself from smoking. I also had a marriage that was kind of on the rocks, and I was smoking as a way to stay in that marriage because I didn't want to leave the kids. They were so cute, and we had a nice home in West LA, and those kids were so cute,
I
and
know you loved your
I just didn't
kids.
want to leave them. So I just kept smoking my way through the next 8 years, basically, to the point where when they were almost 12 and 14, they're only 2 weeks apart, at 2 years and 2 weeks apart. Um, and they started noticing that there's something wrong with me. It's like,
Mm.
I gotta do something about this. I can't keep getting high. This is not the way for me. I gotta find some other way. And
Did
so,
you
go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you also feel like it was affecting your work?
Well, my work was already done by that point. I mean, I had so many character defects that I had a pretty good TV career going until I shot myself in the foot enough because of my FU problem, my emotional sobriety problem. I was not very good with producers or anybody else who, pissed me off and told me what to do. I didn't, I got good enough at what I was doing at my craft that I didn't want people messing with me. And a lot of people let me do my thing, and it was great. I did a lot of shows that were great. But I did a number of shows where the producers were like, "No, you do it our way," or "It's the highway." And sometimes I would say, "Okay, I'll just go the highway. See ya." And
Yeah.
my career started to decline very quickly because of that. I
Yeah.
mean, I was, so I was already in trouble professionally by that point. I mean, the problem with being high is that, like, I don't want to be high when I'm in pre-production or in production. I want to make sure if I make any mistakes, it's not because I was stoned. I don't want to be. I was never high in school, never.
Mhm.
But the problem is when you stop smoking pot, which you've been doing regularly, you're in withdrawal. It's like it takes 3 months to get this stuff out of your system.
Yeah.
Withdrawal, you're just, restless, irritable, and discontent, as the big book says. And that's the way I was. You walk on a set. I'm there at 6:30 in the morning, and I'm already, and I'm sleep deprived because I'm like, restless all night because I haven't been smoking my weed. And
Right.
I have to get there at 6:30 a.m. and already it's like, don't fuck with me. Can I say that on this podcast?
Yeah, you just did. No, it's
So,
fine.
so I had already, had trouble with work. I was already in big trouble with
Okay.
work. So it did affect me. And so it was just that was 2000. Then I got a call from a friend of mine. I was high on December 18th, 2003. I got a call from a friend of mine who was at like a rehab in Utah, like a swank rehab. And the message I got was, "It's your turn. It's time for you should think about going sober." And I was like, you know what? I think you're right. I'm going to go sober. So I drank my way through New Year's. December 18th, 2003 was the last time I got high on weed. I was high when I got the phone call. I drank my way through New Year's, and on New Year's Day of 2004, January 1, that's my sober birthday. That's when I
Wow.
decided to go sober. And then 2 weeks later, I moved out of my house.
Wow. Yeah. That part that you describe about moving out and sitting in front of your apartment in a car, and it just seemed like such a difficult, lonely time. I feel like loneliness is such a difficult feeling for those of us that struggle with addiction. What got you through that phase?
Well, what got me through that phase was mostly the meetings. I just started going to meetings and a lot of them and meeting people in recovery and, 90 meetings in 90 days and started to connect with that community. I mean, the opposite of addiction, we often say at Beit Teshuva, the residential, addiction treatment center I'm a board member of is the opposite of addiction is connection,
Hmm.
not just sobriety, it's connection. I mean,
Yeah.
the meetings I think were what really got me through, and I was really lucky that I started to meet people and people that I had known for many years. I started to see in the meetings and a lot of meetings in LA, 24, 24
Yeah.
7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So there's plenty to pick from, and then going to Al-Anon meetings too were also very helpful to me. So that was a big part of my recovery, and then stepping up the exercise and the endorphin thing, that was also a big part. I mean, like working out every day and going to the gym and doing all that and trying to get my physical fitness back. All that was, I think, what was really helpful to me.
Yeah. And maybe we can take a step back. How did you make it to your first meeting? It sounded like you went to your very first one with your dad. Is that true?
Yeah, my first meeting was with my dad, but I wasn't sober at the time. This is in the mid to late 90s when he got sober.
Okay.
So I'd never been to an AA meeting, and I went to one at La Cienega Park, and it was a men's meeting on a Saturday morning. And that's when I heard the 12 steps for the first time, which absolutely infuriated me because my dad had never made an amends to me.
I remember reading that in the book and I was like, "Ooh, yeah, that would set me off too."
Yeah, that's when I realized AA was completely bogus.
It was A's fault your dad didn't do amends.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah.
like,
clearly.
Yeah, it was an interesting experience, but I didn't go back to meetings. That was probably that could have been 6 to 8 years before I started going to meetings on my own.
Yeah. Why do you think your dad invited you?
That's one of the big mysteries that I try to, delve into with the book. Um, I don't know, because I could never tell what Leonard was thinking at any given moment. I never knew what was on that guy's mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know why he took me to get me sober or to show him what he was doing in recovery or to expose me to AA or to
Yeah.
pull an intervention. I have no clue.
Yeah. Okay, so it was 8 years later that you did your stint in rehab, and then did you start going to meetings right away?
No, I was never in rehab. I never went to rehab.
Oh, your friend said it was your turn, but he just meant get sober, not go to rehab.
Yeah, it just meant sober up. And I just started going to meetings. I thankfully did not need to go to rehab. I mean,
Yeah.
look, I identify as an alcoholic, but I'm not an alcoholic. I'm a pothead. And,
Right. Yeah.
and I had a good friend in recovery who said, you know what, I totally believe you. I believe that alcohol is not your drug of choice and you had no problem with alcohol. Having said that, you should have no problem not taking a drink and being completely sober in AA, which is like everything. And he was right. I mean, I was like, I had no problem not taking a drink. And as I went to more meetings, the obsession for weed started to subside finally.
Yeah.
So the meetings are great. The program is amazing. I mean, look, it's a program of action and you have to do stuff. And that's what really helped me through. I mean, for a while there, I really was a poster child for AA. I mean, I had a sponsor and I was going to meetings and I read the big book and I worked the steps and I took commitments and I was of service and I found a higher power. And, I mean, it's a program of action. You got to do stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. What was your process like for finding a sponsor?
I started going to meetings, and I had a good friend of mine who was in a writing class with me, who was also in recovery. It's the other thing that really kind of inspired me to go to meetings. So I'm in this writing class, and I'm really enjoying the class. And there are 15 women in the class and 3 guys, and I'm newly single, so this just suits me just perfectly.
Hey now.
And I'm bringing in material that I'm reading, and I'm getting a lot of support and a lot of feedback from the women and really enjoying it. And then this guy shows up to the class. He's younger, he's better looking, and he's funnier than me. And he's in recovery as well.
Yeah,
And he's
yeah.
writing about recovery. And it just pissed me off. He just really pissed me off.
You talk about it in the book, and it was so funny because I could just see you sitting there, you're just, soaking up all the attention from the ladies, and then this guy comes in and ruins it for you.
Yeah, he ruined it. He ruined it. But I couldn't stop laughing. I mean, I just wanted to hate him, but I couldn't stop laughing. His stuff was so funny. And then
Yeah.
and then he invited me to a meeting, and he's the one who said, "Look, dude, you're not an alcoholic. You shouldn't have a problem. Don't take a drink. Just
Right.
the program." And that was number one. And he's the one who said, "I'm going to find you your first sponsor," and he did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he turned me on to somebody. He was very good. The guy was by the book, and he was great. And then after him, I had another sponsor that I was working with who was a real piece of work. I had one of these guys who was he had a shaved head. He had like ink all over his body, and he was a badass, mean motherfucker. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what I was doing with this guy, except that I liked what he was sharing at the meetings.
Yeah.
This guy had a problem before he got sober. He was solving his problems by putting his fist in people's faces.
Mm-hmm. I think I've met some of those people.
Yeah, I mean, they're there, but he was a really interesting guy, and he had a lot of recovery, and I really liked
Mm.
working with him. And he was a sponsor who had a big effect on me, actually.
Oh, nice.
I
What was
was
it
saying,
about him?
what's that?
What was it about him that had such a profound effect on you?
I'll tell you, it's like, here's something that happened to me with him. It's like, so I was going to this meeting. We were at a private house and we had a meeting there, and it was on Thursday night. So, and we've been going for years. And I'd been going with this guy, and I'm always anonymous. Here's the other thing: it's like he never knew I was Leonard Nimoy's son, and I
Mm.
knew him for years, before he even sponsored me. And then he found out, and he's like, "What? What? I just love the people's reactions. I look because I love being anonymous. That's another thing about being Leonard Nimoy's son. It's nice to like fly beneath the radar. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, I've been with this guy for several months, and then they decided they were going to move the meeting to a men's house, sober living in Culver City. And I went, okay. So I went to this meeting in Culver City, and these guys were like, it was heavy. I mean, they were really struggling. There were meth addicts, there were heroin
Mm-hmm.
addicts, there was, it was really hardcore, and I had trouble relating, and I was like, I didn't feel comfortable there. And I called my sponsor and I said, you know what? I don't think I'm going to go back to that meeting. I'm going to find another meeting because I can't relate to those guys, or I'm just a pothead. And my sponsor he said to me, he had a big effect on me. He said, he said, I got news for you. You need those guys as badly as they need you.
Wow.
Yeah. So you should be looking for the similarities in your experience and not focusing on the differences. So why don't you come down off your high horse and just show up for yourself and show up for them? Be at that meeting. And then he hung up on me. He's such a mean mofo.
You
And then
sounded
he
very
hung up on me.
angry.
He said, you better be at that meeting. I mean, like he was going to come punch me out if I wasn't. And,
He's
and
gonna
he was,
compete.
I think he was right. He was so right.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, I learned a lot by hanging in there with those guys, and they really appreciated that I was there. So
yeah,
it was an eye-opening experience.
yeah. It turns out we're all more alike than we are different. And those are really interesting rooms where you assess somebody for their outward appearance, but when they speak, it's like all the feelings are all the same, right? Our outsides must be different, but our feelings are all the same.
Yeah, and yeah, we're dealing with very similar issues, and the other thing is, quite honestly, it just keeps me putting things in perspective.
Yeah,
And that's why I stay with Beit Teshuva because I hear a lot of those residents who coming in, they're newcomers, and
yeah,
newcomers are the lifeblood of the program. And for me, the reason for
100%.
that is because they're like trying to change their lives desperately,
Yeah,
right now. And it's really inspirational. It gives me a lot of gratitude for where I'm at and that my problems are quality problems. But also,
mhm,
but relapse really is around the corner for all of us, for
yeah,
everybody. It's right behind us. And
mhm,
when I'm with newcomers, it's like a reminder, yeah, I don't want to go back out there. I don't want to be like that anymore. I don't want to raise my hand as a newcomer. I'm glad to hear their story. I hope I can be of some help, service to them because it
yeah,
makes me feel better about my own recovery. But
mhm,
it's a real eye opener when you see people. And then we see people because I'm a board member at this residential addiction treatment center. We see people who relapse and they don't come back because they're
I
gone.
know. Yeah, they die. Yeah.
Yeah, they
It's
die.
so sad. It's so
It's
sad.
really sad.
Yeah, there's that old saying that no matter how far down the road you go, you're still the same distance from the ditch, right? It's like we're just so close. So it's so important to stay the course.
All right,
Um,
write that down, Arlena. Hold on.
oh, I listen, I didn't come up with it, but I really love
Okay.
that saying.
All
It does
right.
kind of put things into perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You got to stay humble. Let me ask you, you know, the thing about doing the steps for me, I think the 4 step was the first time I had an actual pragmatic process for sorting out all my baggage, right? All my history, all my resentments. What was that first go around like for you?
Well, it was good. It was enlightening. I mean, it's really about keeping the focus on yourself. That's where I started to realize that the program is about the serenity prayer, which is accept them, change me, please, God, please grant me the
Yeah.
serenity to accept the things I cannot change, other people, the courage to change the things I can, me, and that's what the 4 step was about for me. It was really about finding ways, looking at my own behavior and just trying to work on my own problems, which was going to be a lifelong commitment, and that's when I started to realize this may take some time. I thought I was going to be in, AA for a couple of years and dry out and go back out there. But
Yeah.
the 4 step really kind of gets you to see like, oh boy, this is stuff, this is the way I'm wired,
Yeah.
and it's going to take a lot of work and it may be a long time, it may be forever. I mean, when you're a warp, with drink and joint in hand, I basically warped my mind.
Yeah.
And if you remember the days of vinyl, when you have a warped record, there ain't nothing you can do about it. It's
Mm-hmm.
warped.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how many books you put on it to try to flatten it out, it ain't gonna work. And that's my mind. I'm just I'm wired that way. And so the four step really came into play, when I was dealing with this guy. That's
Yeah. Picture of Spock.
yeah, that's when it started to really hit me what the four step was all about, because he took my inventory for me. He sent me
Right.
a letter with all the things that he thought were my character defects. And
Really?
yeah,
Oh,
oh yeah, he sent me a letter, and it's like I was like so pissed off about it. And
yeah.
my friend, my two friends in recovery said, "This is perfect. He's done your fourth column of your fourth step for you. Your part in it. Go make an amends."
That's rude.
Yeah. So
We call that spiritual rudeness where I'm from.
yeah, really,
It's important to
was a
know, but
rude awakening
a
because
rude
they were right.
a rude awakening, that's for sure. It's so fun. When I did my first four step, I started seeing all these patterns of behavior. And one of my biggest patterns of behavior is taking inappropriate responsibility for others and not taking responsibility for myself. I had an older sister who was I don't know how to put it, but she had some problems, and I felt it was my job to help her, and which came in the form of like being controlling, right? And but then when it came to taking responsibility for myself, I often say I showed up to the rooms completely self-centered but incapable of self-examination. So I wasn't taking any responsibility for myself. Did you find that after doing your inventory you had some of those same revelations?
Yeah, you have a very pretty smile. Can I say that?
Oh, thanks. I
Yeah,
have braces.
I wish I could see you in real time. You're still like, it's still
My
weird.
vid I know my video's all messed up, yeah,
It's
on
kind of
your end.
weird. It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Thanks for hanging in there.
okay, you're welcome. Okay, so yeah, here's where it became an issue for me. It had a lot to do with my kids, and I do write about them a lot in the book.
You do,
It's
yeah.
my daughter, because she really knew how to press my buttons just like my dad did.
Man, she would come right out and say, I hate you. That was like, as a mother, like that was horrifying. That must have been so painful.
Pretty painful. Yeah, it was difficult. It was really difficult. And issues with my son as well, because the fact of the matter is that, yeah, I wanted to take responsibility for myself. I did have to learn to keep the focus on myself. I did
Mhm.
have to learn to let go and let God. I did have to learn what was none of my business.
Yeah.
The problem is I'm raising two kids, and as a parent, some of it is your business.
Right. Yeah.
That's where it gets really tricky. It
Yeah.
is your business to be in their business. So,
Yeah.
but then again, but I don't want to be like my dad. And I was just talking with somebody else the other day, and it's like I did not want to make the mistakes that my parents made, my dad in particular, but then
Right.
I ended up making my own mistakes anyway. But
Yeah,
the
but they
what you
were
said,
different. They were different. Like, what really came across in your book was just how much you loved your kids.
well, yeah, yes, I have a visceral connection to my kids that I did not have with my dad growing up. There's no
Yeah.
doubt about that. And
Yeah.
they're more like me because they grew up in sunny Southern California and had the same milieu that I grew up in, basically. So
Right.
we're very
Right.
close in that respect. And I managed to brainwash my son into becoming a rock and roller because he was going to be a disaster in school. And thank God he learned how to play rock and roll, because he's somehow figured out how to make a living doing it.
That's amazing.
Yeah, but a lot of the times I just had to let him be his own guy and march to his own drum beat.
Yeah.
And he was a drummer. Literally, he started off with drums, but he was ridiculous. I mean, I couldn't get him to do any freaking homework.
School's not for everybody.
What?
School is not for everybody.
No, it's not. I mean, by contrast, his sister was like always at her desk, left-handed, weirdly enough, left-handed, writing, 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 and he was like figuring out, the leads to some Jimmy Page solo. I mean, it was just like, Jonah, dude, can you do some homework, please? Oh yeah, okay, yeah, I'll do it. Don't worry. No.
You know what else came through in your book is, that period of time when you were, when you separated from your wife and you were, um, going back to the house, like, over the years, I could really see the progression in how you related with her in terms of, being able to raise the kids together and being able to talk to each other. I know you made amends to her a bazillion times, um, but it sounded
We're still making amends to her.
still making
She still
living
wants it.
amends. Yeah, but it sounded like she got to the place where she made amends to you too.
Yeah, I mean, we got to yeah, and we had to work at it. That was another thing. It's like, I just had to, oh my God, that was so she was so challenging. She was really challenging. My ex-wife, she's an amazing person. I just adore her. But, the fact of the matter is we needed to hang in there for the kids, for the benefit of
Yeah,
the kids, and she even understood that.
yeah.
But as my mother says in the book, my ex, Nancy, was no cupcake.
Your mom.
That's how my mother described her. She's no cupcake, and she was not.
Yeah,
So
your mom was funny.
yeah, but there is an arc, which you mentioned, and that's the whole point of the book. There's an arc to the
Yeah,
relationship. There is a development. There's a growth. I did change over time, and when you change in AA, my experience has been stuff starts changing around you. It's
yeah,
just inevitable.
yeah,
When you don't stop taking people on and stop knocking heads with everybody, then just there's a whole shift in the way people relate to you, and I think it ended up for the better between me and Nancy and my ex because we're still celebrating Thanksgiving together and Passover together, and she's
wow.
amazing. She's just amazing.
That's awesome. And I know that you had a lot of grief. You write a lot about the grief that you experience in the book, and you mentioned your friend Justin who had a relapse. Talk to me a little bit about what that was like for you.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was a situation where it's also a fine line between, let go and let God and intervention
Hmm.
because he had relapsed. And, it just got to a point where I realized there was nothing I could do for him. He was gone. He was lost. That's the thing that's so weird about the program. And, it's like, and my kids knew Justin, and he was a big influence on me and my recovery.
Yeah,
And he was a guy I talked to almost every day
yeah,
about stuff, about dating, about recovery, about going to meetings, about being productive and writing, and we were big. I was a blessing in his life because he had a very difficult life, and he just loved me and loved my family and loved my kids. But and I adored him. He was amazing. He had 3 or 4 years more than I did in recovery, but then things, spun out of control, and he went on the road with his band and had a relapse, and he never recovered from that. And I just lost him, and
mm.
it's painful because he was my go-to kid. He was the guy I talked to all the time. He was my best friend in recovery, no doubt
Oh,
about it.
so
And he was about
sad.
10. He was a little over. I think he was 12 years younger than me, and he was so cool and so hip and so funny and so groovy and so talented. I mean, just a great bass player and just hilarious. I mean, he'd call me up and leave these ridiculous messages on, and some of which I put in the book, and would talk to me about about dating, and I don't know. He was just amazing, and I'm so lucky and grateful. The point is to have the gratitude that it
Yeah,
happened at all,
right.
that he was in my life at all. I'm so grateful because I had him when he was at a really good point, and he gave me all that he could give me, and it was a lot, and it changed my life.
Yeah, no, he sounded like an amazing person, and that is part of recovery is being in this community where people are at high risk and not everybody makes it. And it is really hard for those of us that are in their orbit. It's hard to deal with that. It's really painful. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
You've also, I love the story about your mom. Your mom just seemed like such a good mom. And I lost my mom in the last couple years, and so the story of your mom was so touching to me. Tell me a little bit about what your relationship was like with her.
When my, my mother, uh, well, she was a trippy chick. She was trippy. She was. I mean, she was like, she was so groovy when we were growing up. She was so groovy. She was a very cool mom. She grew up. She was born in Cordova, Alaska.
Oh.
Her father, who came from Russia, had an adventurous spirit, and he decided to go to Alaska and find fame and fortune there. And he did. He did very well there. And she and her sister were raised there until they went to high school, and they ran out of teachers basically because it's a fishing village really.
Yeah.
And then she went to Bellingham, Washington, where there were relatives, and then she came to LA and finished at LA high school, and then went to USC. She wanted to go into theater, and that's where she met my dad. She was working in the theater, and then immediately became a housewife and had two kids. But she was like one of these women who kind of followed in the Jackie Kennedy mode of
Mm.
trying to be cool and hip in the late 50s, early 60s, and wore those kind of clothes. And
Hmm.
then, when the 60s came, my mom was, all on flower child. I mean,
So funny.
she was older than most hippies at that time, but she took on the whole, flower child lifestyle. She wore very groovy clothes and rose-colored glasses, and there were flowers everywhere. I mean, mostly dead flowers and dried flowers.
Dried flowers.
Yeah, all over, and stickers, flowered stickers on the refrigerator, and she was and a lot of color in the house.
Mm.
I mean, everything was, upholstered in bright colors, and she was a fascinating person. I just really loved her. She just transitioned to. I often say she transitioned beautifully to a flower power priestess to the wife of Spock. She was just very, very groovy, very cool. I mean, she took us to see Cream. Eric Clapton and Cream. We were there at the Forum in 1968 in the
That's
10th row. We
amazing.
were right there. I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was like it had such an impact on my life watching Eric Clapton from the 10th row.
That's
You know,
amazing.
this is 68. I was 12, October 68.
That's amazing.
It was amazing. She was an amazing. She took my sister to see Jimi Hendrix at the Hollywood Bowl. I mean, my mom was out of this world. But
Yeah.
then my dad left her, and she was like, "Oh my God, oi!"
Yeah. That
It was
sounded
work. It
rough.
was a lot of recovery work to
Yeah.
to let go and let God on my mom, because she picked a very specific lifestyle for herself that I could not relate to or understand.
Yeah. Yeah. That's rough. But it sounded like at the end, how long had you been sober when she passed away?
Well, she passed away in 2011, so I was 7 years sober.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't care how long you've been sober. It's like when you lose your parent that you love so much, that grief process is rough.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, that she had the love and affection that I was missing from my dad. It's
Yeah.
definitely my mom, and that's where it came down. Where she finally said, "Don't give me trouble for," because I had to drag her to all these doctors looking for a terminal diagnosis.
Yeah.
It was just
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Right.
And
Yeah.
she's like, "I'm entitled. I took good care of you. I used to drag you to the allergist to get your shots twice a week, in mid
Yeah.
Wilshire. I did my bit. It's your turn now.
It's your
Entitled." I'm like, "Okay, fine. You're right. Okay, whatever. Fine." And I had to like 10th step myself and make
Yeah.
an amends to her for my emotional relapse by giving her
Yeah.
hell for going to too many doctors.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you handled that, with grace, and it was nice that you guys had such a good relationship. And a lot of the book is about how, especially that third part was how you reconciled with your dad, how you made peace, and there was a time when he was comforting you when your wife was really sick. And do you mind telling that story?
Well, yeah, I mean, he just was the guy that I would call. He was, Justin was no longer around,
Mhm.
and my dad was available. He was semi-retired by that point and slowing down, and his focus was more on family and not on career anymore. He had changed his priorities, and he was just available. And he was always a good guy to talk to. It was just that, it was. he was much more accepting and less judgmental and more loving and more kind. And he had transformed himself, through
Yeah.
his own means of recovery. And he made his amends to me was his living amends by
Mhm.
helping me, talking to me when I called. I mean, I told him a bunch of shit that happened with Martha, that I couldn't,
Yeah.
that I just needed someone to tell, and he was really available. And he's the guy who took me to Beit Teshuva, that residential addiction treatment center, for Shabbat service, to kind of help me out and give me a break on a Friday night, and that completely changed my whole worldview. And I've been with them ever since. So um, he had a lot of impact. It was really he became the dad that I always needed as a young
Mm.
person that he simply could not become for me.
That's beautiful. I mean, that was really sort of the highlight and put a bow on the book was that you came to that place. It was so beautiful. I would love to hear a little bit about the work that you do with, I'm afraid I'm not going to say it right, Beit Teshuva.
Yeah, you said it right.
Oh, good. Tell me about the work that you do there.
Well, I
Why is
love
that funny?
well because it's a crazy zany place. I mean, on the one hand, we're dealing with the struggle, life and death struggles that the
Yeah.
people, that the newcomers are there, the residents are there, mostly
Mhm.
young people. On the other hand, we're always looking for the joke and we're having a good time. And I have very close friends there who are much younger than me and keep me on my toes, keep me laughing, and it's all about the joke and trying to find the humor in even the struggle to survive.
Yeah.
I'm a board member there. I'm head of a couple of the committees there. I'm very involved with we got a new rabbi coming in. I was involved with searching and finding a new rabbi. And the programming we do, it's a faith-based institution. There's a lot of spirituality. I mean, having
Mm.
had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, I mean, it's a program of spirituality. And,
Right,
and
right.
that's really what we're trying to do there is to help people find some spirituality in their lives because we believe it helps with recovery. Also, we create a community there where people can be connected. Again,
Yeah.
the opposite of addiction is not necessarily sobriety; it's connection.
Yeah.
And so we have a very good community, strong community there, and a lot of professionals who are on the board with me. And we're all just trying to heal the world one person at a time and save a life one person at a time.
Yeah.
We don't turn people away because they have financial need. We are not, a fancy schmancy rehab from Malibu. We're much more, we accept a lot of people from all stratas of society. People who can pay and people who can't pay.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting mix of people. Our Shabbat services are crazy; they're insane because it's part AA meeting, it's part Shabbat service. We have a rock band. It's like a revival meeting. It's a nutty atmosphere. It's like a circus atmosphere. It can just get so nutty there, and it's fun. We dance, we sing. It's just it's fun. It's a phenomenal experience. I love it because it really keeps me centered on my own recovery
Yeah.
and keeps me in being of service to those people. I mean, now we're trying to find a yoga instructor to go in there and help those residents and my meditation teacher. I'm trying to wrangle my yoga instructor and meditation teacher to go there and help those young people figure out
Yeah.
other ways to get high.
Yeah.
And that's through meditation and yoga. For me, it's a big part of my whole self-care that we were talking about.
Yeah.
So these are the
Huge.
kinds of things that I'm doing on a regular basis. I'm going to have a book reading there. I mean, a lot of that book was created from my experience in Beijing. The whole last chapter is is a what we call a drash. It was a midrash. It was an interpretation of Torah on the high holy days of the Jewish high holy days that we celebrate at Beit Yeshuva. So I mean, it's just I'll never leave. They'll never get rid of me.
They'll never get rid of
No, never.
you. No, that's beautiful. I'm gonna leave links to that in the show notes so people can learn more about the work that you're doing. And I just wanna, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for writing this book. It was such a beautiful insight into, the life of, the character that, I grew up loving. And it's just so nice to get that really human perspective and wonderful job. And thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Arlena was excuse me, Arlena, it was a pleasure. You're a lovely person. You ask great questions. You're a great conversationalist. It's great to talk to somebody else who knows what we go through on a one day at a time, and it's
Yes, sir.
lovely.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'll look forward to having conversations again in the future. One last thing before you go, if you enjoyed the podcast today, please don't forget to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher and leave a review. And if you'd like to make a donation to the podcast and help me keep the lights on, you can do so by visiting odatchat.com. There's a donation button or membership button on the right-hand side. Have a great day. Thank you so much for joining us.